comes Haugo, slips out of a few tackles, and Peter Haugo's out for the races.
Sheds the first defender, sheds the second defender.
Busted open. Jack Smith down the right sideline and into the end zone.
Welcome in and glad you could join us for our final Varsity Sports Live of 2023. I'm Jason Andera, flying solo today without the under-the-weather David Brown. Get well soon, Dave. And soon, Jody Norstedt will join me from North Dakota. Let me tell you about the show. We're going to present our finalists for Player of the Year in all 7 classes of South Dakota high school football and all 4 classes of North Dakota high school football. And to kick off the show, let's bring in Jody, and we're going to start in 3A. What a year across the state of North Dakota. Shanley had a record-breaking offense. They were the talk of all of Class 3A all season long. But in the end, it was Minot raising the trophy after that gritty comeback win in the state championship game. I'm guessing a number of your players on your finalist list played in that game.
You're a smart guy, Jandy. We don't give you enough credit. What a season for both those teams, right? You mentioned Shanley's record-breaking year. Just listen to these numbers. Their 568 points scored this season surpassed the previous record held by the 2009 Bismarck State Championship team by 25 points. They averaged 47 a game. The Deacons had a 3,000-yard passer and 2 1,000-yard receivers. I'm not sure we'll see another season like it. That's what makes Minot's victory all that more impressive. Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell has developed this mantra of be at your best when your best is required, and that's exactly what the Magi did in the postseason with comeback wins over Cheyenne and Shanley in the semifinal and championship games. All right, let's get to my Player of the Year finalists. And we're doing it a little differently than previous years. We've axed the honorable mentions, and we're just giving you more finalists. So we have 5 finalists for State Player of the Year in Class 3A, and here they are, with help from coaches weighing in along with media members across the state. We have 3 of the 5 coming from that elite Shanley squad. Let's start with senior receiver and linebacker Jordan Leininger, who was named Co-Senior Athlete of the Year by the Coaches Association. As a junior, Jordan caught a total of 6 passes. This year, he jumped into a feature role on offense and caught 78 passes for over 1,200 yards and 13 touchdowns. He was just as good on defense, if not better, tied for 3rd on the team with 51 tackles and leading the state in interceptions with 7, including a pair of pick sixes. I watched him make ridiculous catches, great breaks on balls for picks, and truck defenders all year. Jordan makes this list with ease. He shared EDC Senior Athlete of the Year honors with this next guy, Davies running back and linebacker Zach Lilly. When the Eagles lost returning All-State quarterback Mason Claybo for the season during the summer, I think a lot of people wrote them off as a serious Dakota Bowl threat. Lilly did his best Kirby Puckett impersonation and said, "Hop on my back, boys, I'll carry you." Lilly rushed for 1,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. On defense, led the EDC in tackles with over 100, including 9 for loss. The rest of the Eagles fed off his play, and by the end of the season, they were playing some great football. Back to Shanley, Landon Meyer, the senior quarterback, was magnificent all year. He broke pretty much every state record possible for a quarterback in 3A in his only season as a starting varsity quarterback. He completed 65% of his nearly 400 attempts and finished with over 3,500 passing yards and 44 touchdowns. That's not to mention 870 rushing yards and 17 scores. So that's a combined 61 touchdowns. That means he averaged just over 5 touchdowns per game himself. What is this, 9-man? Maybe that's why he's number 5, by the way, too. I know a lot of fans will point to Shanley's numbers being inflated with the style of offense that they run, but if it were that easy, why isn't everyone doing it? Meyer had to fill the shoes of a D1 player in Michael Rosberg, and he took the offense to an even higher level in his 1 season as a starter. His skill set, intelligence, and competitiveness make him one of the top players I've seen, and he was playing with broken ribs for most of the season. Next up is Meyer's other 1,000-yard receiver. Sam Oshek led Class 3A with 10 receiving touchdowns last year to go with 750 receiving yards. Somehow he more than doubled both of those numbers, 1,500 receiving yards and 23 touchdowns this fall. 17 of those receiving touchdowns came over the course of the final 7 games of the year. Oshek also added 23 tackles and 3 picks on defense. His combination of speed, body control, and hands make him the perfect weapon in that offense. His state records will be tough to top. Finally, we have a young man that showed time and time again that he simply wanted to win. more than anybody else. Tyson Ruziska, the heartbeat of the state champs from Minot, even though he'll be the first one to deflect the attention to his teammates. Ruziska rumbled for nearly 1,600 rushing yards and 17 touchdowns this fall, adding a couple of receiving scores as well. He was a star on that dominant defense too, making 27 tackles. So in the end, 4 of our 5 finalists played in that state championship game. It doesn't always end up that way, but I think this year it's a unique in that aspect.
I know these decisions on postseason awards are always tough, Jody. I'm just curious, were there any other players that were close to being on this list?
Well, there are certainly some others that deserve to be involved in the conversation. Ruziska's teammate Logan Conklin, dynamite all fall. A pair of running backs from the capital city come to mind: Gavin Lill, Carter Hankey. Cheyenne had some good ones: Caden Olson, Caleb Deere, and stud lineman Cade Petchock. But in the end, our crew feels that these 5 are a cut above the rest. And one more thing I'll add for those Shanley guys, I'd say probably close to 70 to 75% of their production this fall came in the first half of those games. They didn't play in many fourth quarters this season with some lopsided scores, Jandy.
All right, let's switch gears to 2A now. North was your preseason favorite going into the year. The Spartans won the state title, and North senior Peter Haugo was your preseason player of the year in the division. Does he follow suit and claim your postseason player of the year honor?
Jandy, it might be hard to believe, but I don't have Haugo as a finalist this year. Okay, I'm messing with you. Yes, Haugo is in the mix. You'll have to wait until next week to find out if he actually wins the hardware, but he sure did everything he possibly could to lock up the award by leading North to an undefeated season and the program's first state title since 2000. The all-time leading rusher in Spartan history leads off our list of 5 finalists in AA. Haugo rushed for 1,500 yards and 26 touchdowns. So many of those runs were explosive plays, too, where Haugo would break off a 50 or a 60-yard touchdown. The South game is the perfect example. Close game, but Haugo had 3 60-plus yard touchdown runs that were just momentum killers for the Bruins. The future Bison was great on defense, too. 53 tackles and 3 picks. The film doesn't lie. He was built different than a lot of the players in 2A. Next up, we'll go to Red River, where Pierce Parks put together an outstanding junior campaign. A 64% passer. He threw for nearly 1,700 yards and 20 touchdowns against 6 interceptions. He could hurt teams with his legs, too, rushing for 400 yards and 5 scores. Red River got off to a strong 4-0 start. Then the stumble in the second half, but remember, they were just inches away from advancing to the state semifinal round for a second straight year. Next year, I expect Parks and Red River to be back in the hunt for a Final Four spot. South was one of those quarterfinal upset victims as well. The Bruins were beat up by season's end, and that includes senior running back and linebacker Demarion Semenko, who is playing through pain until his final snap. Semenko runs hard and he hits hard. He finished with over 1,200 yards on the ground and 13 scores. He made 34 tackles and forced a few turnovers. Semenko played with an edge that I always enjoyed watching. Speaking of a guy that played with an edge and a proverbial chip on his shoulder, nobody exemplifies that more than Central playmaker Jack Simmers. He was everywhere on Friday nights. Did he play a little reckless at times? Sure. But when the Knights needed a big play, he was usually the guy to make it happen. 23 combined touchdowns on offense and 53 tackles, along with 7 forced turnovers on defense. The Knights are not playing in the Dakota Bowl last Friday without the play of Jack Simmers. Well, Central beat Jamestown to reach the Dakota Bowl. The Blue Jays had one of the top 2-way playmakers in the state in junior receiver and defensive back Nate Walls. He turned 58 catches into 850 yards and 13 touchdowns. He was a difficult matchup on Friday nights in 2A. Quarterbacks probably saw him in their nightmares after he finished with 7 interceptions, including 1 pick six. Bill Nelson's team has to replace quite a bit on the line, but Walls returns along with Caleb Sheely, Max Rittenbach, Thomas Newman, and quarterback Ryan Kalmbach. Those talented playmakers are a good place to start. They should bounce back nicely next fall, Jandy.
Great stuff, Jody. Thank you for that. Coming up next, we'll give the linemen some love as Jody reveals his Player of the Year finalists in Class A and 9-man. Stay with us.
Varsity Sports Live, presented by South Dakota State University. Build a better future with South Dakota State University.
Welcome back. We'll go from the big schools of North Dakota to the smaller schools. But make no mistake, there is plenty of talent in the rural areas in the state, including a pair of Division I linemen that Jody has in the mix for his Player of the Year awards. Jody, what do you got for us?
Well, you're right. All you have to do is look at the two most recent NFL drafts to see the caliber of small school offensive linemen across the state. Cordell Volson, pride of Belfour, North Dakota, drafted in the 4th round by the Bengals in 2022. He started 25 games already. Hankinson's Cody Mauk, picked in the 2nd round by the Bucs this past spring. He started all 9 games for Tampa this year. So yes, linemen deserve a lot of praise in these parts, and we're going to talk about some of them coming up. Let's take a look at my Class A finalists. And starting in alphabetical order, it's Hank Bodine from Velva Drake and Moose Garrison. Speaking of Cordell Volson, by the way, he has 2 brothers on that Aggies team, Kyle and Zach, who will be seniors next fall. Cordell actually made it back for a game to watch the Aggies top Bowman County in the 1st round of the playoffs. I'm sure he liked what he saw from this guy, Bodine, who finished the year with 21 rushing touchdowns, 4 receiving touchdowns, and over 1,200 combo yards. Bodine was a game record on defense, too, amassing 76 tackles, including 9.5 tackles for loss. Last year, Bodine's teammate Ben Shep was crowned our Midco Sports Player of the Year. He could have easily been on this finalist list again with 2,300 passing yards and 34 passing touchdowns, but I wanted to narrow it down to 1 Aggie and get some other people on the list. So, Shep, you get another shot next fall. Heck, so will Bodine, Reggie Bruner, and Trayson Egelhart. Yes, Velva may have had its 24-game win streak snapped, but they will be dangerous in 2024. A lot of talent coming back. The alphabetical transition sets up pretty smoothly here because Trinity's Ty Dossinger is the man most responsible for snapping Velva's big win streak. He accounted for more than 200 yards and 4 touchdowns in the 45-34 semifinal win over the Aggies. On a roster littered with talent, Dossinger was the best of the best. He racked up 1,500 yards of offense this season and scored 23 touchdowns while helping his team reach the Dakota Bowl for the first time since 2006. He punished people on defense, making close to 70 tackles, including 8 TFLs, and that's with teams trying to run plays away from number 7. Next up is Langdon Edmore Munich stud Mason Rumfo. In Josh Kravarchka's offense, you need to be able to be diverse with your skill set, and that is exactly the type of player Mason is. He finished with over 100 rushes and over 50 catches and was over 750 yards on both the ground and through the air, while totaling 28 offensive touchdowns. That's pretty good. His quarterback, Race Worley, definitely worthy of being in the conversation too, with nearly 2,400 passing yards and 41 offensive touchdowns. But for me, Rumfo's the choice. He was such a shutdown player on defense too, making 63 tackles and intercepting 6 passes. The last 2 finalists are teammates from Kindred. Jake Starcevic and Riley Sunram had terrific years in leading the Vikings to their 2nd state title in 3 years. Starcevic moved from Thompson over the summer, and he made his impact felt right away, making plays in the season-opening win over rival Central Cass, and then he just never stopped. He finished the year as a 1,000-yard passer and 1,000-yard rusher, combining for 36 touchdowns. His defensive impact probably gets overlooked. He had double-digit TFLs, including 3 sacks this season. Perhaps his biggest play of the season was the pick 6 in the state championship win over Trinity. Like Bodine, Starcevic will have a shot at being a rare 4-time All-State pick next fall. Hard to bet against that. Sunram, the future Golden Gopher, anchored a Kindred offensive line that averaged 287 rushing yards per game and 7.5 yards per carry. The 6'6", 285-pound mauler was the guy they liked to run behind on the plays that mattered most. Defensively, the double teams came consistently, but he still managed to finish with 40-plus tackles, highlighted by his 6.5 sacks and 13 tackles for loss. There's a reason FBS programs were lined up to offer Sunram. Heck of a year for him, who finishes his career helping the Vikings to an undefeated season and a 2nd championship trophy, Jandy.
Well, no doubt that's a great list, but it must get difficult trying to weigh between linemen and some of these gaudy stats that these other players have.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? And it's partially the reason why we wanted to extend our number of finalists this year, because it's so hard to decipher the impact that these players have. So I make sure I'm consistently talking and messaging with coaches and media, kind of like yourself. I'd say Huddle has become a great resource for when it comes to decisions like this, but there will inevitably be young men left off these lists that probably have a strong case to be on it, but we'll just continue to do our best, right, my friend?
That's probably the best way to put it. Okay, let's get to your final class of finalists from the 9-man ranks. And Jody, this is where the stats can get ridiculous. With the extra room on the field, the super athletes typically dominate, and this year, well, no exception.
Yeah, you are exactly right. Some video game numbers. This class made me rack my brain so much that I said, the heck with 5 finalists, I need a 6th. Let me know who I have to pay for doing that, Jandy, and I'll do it. I just don't see how I can leave any of these guys off. In fact, I wish I could have twisted some arms to get 7 or 8 finalists, but that'd probably be just a little too much. Here's a look at the Super 6, starting with West Hope, Newberg, Glenburn Jr., Walker Broughton. The numbers are almost preposterous. 2,000 passing yards, 1,600 rushing yards, and a combined 62 touchdowns. If you include his 3 return touchdowns and 2 pick sixes, that gets you to that number 62. Defensively, he was in on over 100 tackles, intercepted 8 passes. Broughton guided the Sioux to the semifinal round, where they suffered their only loss of the season at the hands, of course, of the eventual state champs from North Prairie. An absolute treat to watch, and he should have West Hope Newberg in the mix for a state tournament bid in hoops coming up this winter. The same can be said for this next guy, Javin Fries from Grant County Flasher, pretty good basketball player himself. Fries and Broughton might be battling for the scoring title in Class B this winter. Javin passed for 800 yards and 8 scores this fall, while adding nearly 2,000 yards on the ground with 35 touchdowns. He broke all the Storm season and career rushing records from the quarterback spot in the way he ran the ball. He also did a lot of damage on special teams and defense. On a team lacking varsity experience, Fries made up for that by being a scoring threat from anywhere on the field. The Storm are going to miss that one. South Border had a pair of big-time producers this fall in sophomore QB Berkeley France and senior running back Connor Koziak. I decided to go with the senior on this one, and what a story Koziak is. He went down with an injury in week 1 last year and missed the rest of his junior season. He comes back for his senior year and leads the Mustangs to the Dakota Bowl for the first time in program history, and this is after being part of a 1-win team his freshman year. Koziak was just shy of 2,000 combo yards and racked up 27 touchdowns this season. Finished the year with 6 interceptions on defense. Great young man and deserving of a finalist spot. The next 2 are teammates with the state champs, North Prairie's Blake Matson and Nate Tasted. Matson balled out in the championship game with 90 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. He added 8 tackles and a pick on defense. He was the Cougar offense. Look at this yardage. He rushed for 3,464 yards and 53 touchdowns. That's not a typo. He also passed for 400 yards and 4 scores. Early in the season, the Cougars lost their starting quarterback to injury. They shuffled Matson back there and relied on his playmaking abilities from the QB spot. He also added 75 tackles and 6 interceptions on D. I mean, almost 3,500 rushing yards in one season. That is incredible. And that's why this next guy deserves a spot on the list too. NDSU commit Nate Tasted was the key piece to that dominant offensive line at North Prairie that paved the way for 410 rushing yards per game and nearly 11 yards per carry. Tasted also shined on defense with over 50 stops, 14 TFLs, and 6 sacks. And remember, it was him and his brother Brett that came up with the stop on what turned out to be the final play of the game in the state championship win over the Mustangs. We finish off with the lightning rod from Lemoore Litchfield Marion. Gunnar Thielges can do it all. A 1,000-yard passer and a 2,000-yard rusher that totaled 44 scores on offense. He put up big numbers on defense too. What a great senior season. Oh wait, sorry Region 1 coaches, he's actually a sophomore. And that Lobos team graduates just 3 seniors. Look out for that squad in 2024. A shout out to a few more honorable mention types, guys like the Sargent County duo of Luke Martinson and Josh Wittich, Dane Hagler from North Star, Dang Dang from Four Winds, New Rockford Cheyenne Maddock had some great playmakers too with Nadarud, Maddock, Benz, and Simon. Jandy, that wraps it up though from North Dakota's side of things. Another year where our Midco sports team feels pretty spoiled to get to cover these young athletes on a weekly basis, from game balls to extra credit to live games to right here on Varsity Sports Live. It is a pretty fun time of year.
It is an absolute blast, Jody. And remember, right now on our Instagram page at Midco Sports, you can go and voice your opinion on who you think should be the player of the year in each of these classes. So thank you for all of the great information to help people make their decisions, Jody.
Yeah, let your voice be heard. It's not the ultimate decision, but it does play a factor in who ends up winning the hardware as the player of the year in each class.
All right, thanks, Jody. Well, when we come back, Jody started from big to small. We're going to start from small to big. The small classes in South Dakota in 9-man football coming up right after this.
Varsity Sports Live, presented by Farmers Union Insurance. Simply different. Varsity Sports Live, presented by South Dakota State University. Build a better future with South Dakota State University.
Welcome back to Varsity Sports Live. This is our year-end edition where we tell you the finalists for Player of the Year in all 7 classes of South Dakota high school football. And we'll start with the smallest class in 9B. It was the Avon Pirates claiming the championship in this division, and it was Faulkton and De Smet, the number 1 and 2 teams most of the year in the rankings. Well, all 3 of those teams have a candidate on this year's finalist list. We'll start in alphabetical order with the quarterback, Britt Carlson from De Smet. He led the team on both sides of the ball. They made it all the way to another semifinal appearance, and he was a tough quarterback. He generated 34 touchdowns with his arm and his legs. Plus, he may have been the most versatile defender as well in the team. Not often do you get a quarterback who also lines up as a defensive end. The guy was an absolute beast at defensive end, double-digit TFLs, 68 tackles, and 10 sacks from the quarterback, Britt Carlson. Lane Cotton of Faulkton area, he showed some development this season. He's been the starter at Faulkton for the last 2 years, and he's turned into one of the best players in the class. He led the Trojans to a number 1 ranking in the polls for most of the season, and despite having several games shortened by the mercy rule, he still put up some really impressive numbers. You see, he was over 50% passing, 1,300 yards through the air, 500 more on the ground, and he was a huge threat on defense as well, picking off 6 passes on defense. How about Isaiah Meyer of Avon? He quite simply took over games and vaulted the Pirates to a championship. He came to the state from Wyoming last year, so he was a relatively new name coming into the year. And boy, he made Avon a contender. He sat out the first game of the year and got stronger and stronger as the year wore on. He had 4 different games where he gained at least 200 yards on the ground, and he ended up the year with nearly 2,000 yards rushing and 34 touchdowns. Also a leader on defense, one of the fastest players you'll find in 9B. We'll make the transition to 9A now. We've got 4 finalists in this class, and we'll start with last season's Player of the Year, Hunter Kramer of Warner. He didn't do much to lower his standing after that Player of the Year performance last year. Warner marched to an undefeated season in 9A behind this stellar athlete. He was an automatic mismatch, whether he was running the football or throwing the football. 1,595 yards through the air and 13 touchdowns, but maybe more importantly, what he did on the ground. He secured 31 rushing touchdowns from the quarterback position, and he was also a huge leader on the defensive side of the ball. Gavin Landmark of Dubrook. I'm not sure there was a faster player in all of 9A than Gavin was. He led the upstart Dubrook Dolphins on a surge all the way to the Dakota Dome and a runner-up finish. He never took a play off. His head coach, Nathan Lamb, said he was one of the smartest and toughest kids that he's ever been around. He would gladly take 9 of him on his team at any single part of the year. Let's talk about Tage Ortman now of Canastota. He has been a 3-year starter, a captain for Canastota, a really tough schedule, year in, year out. So it kind of skews his stats, I think, a little bit because he had such competition through the year. But not much to worry about with the skewed stats. 1,700 yards through the air and ran for almost 1,000 more. And on defense, again, one of the best players you'll find. So in all these 9-man classes, the effect that these players have on both sides of the ball makes a huge difference. And all 3 of these guys made that huge difference. Let's move to Class 9AA now. And tons of players in this class. Coming into the season, we knew 9AA was going to be competitive, and it turned out to be that plus some at the end. We'll start out with one of the top teams coming into the year, Wall. They featured their quarterback, Burke Blasius, and his head coach, Lex Heathershaw, calls him a generational talent. A great worker, a great leader, and a very special person on and off the field. He did it on both sides of the ball. And he had an especially heavy workload this year with so many injuries to his teammates. He completed almost 70% of his passes, almost 1,600 yards through the air, and he ran for 770 more. And that was a team that only made it to the quarterfinal round If he made it to the Dome like they did last year, you can add 2 more games worth of stats to that. Now the leader for Howard, Taden Hoyer. He runs the offense perfectly and is an unbelievable athlete, according to his head coach, Pat Rummel. He lost just 2 games as the starting quarterback at Howard, made it to the Dome twice, claimed 1 title as a sophomore, and got to the title game again as a senior. He didn't have to pass that much, but when he did, he made huge plays, averaging over 20 yards per completion and 17 touchdowns through the air. And compare that with just 2 interceptions. So they always felt confident when they got to throw the ball with Taden Hoyer. On the ground, ran for almost 1,000 yards and got 13 touchdowns. And on top of that, of course, you look at these 9-man players, what they do defensively, 6 interceptions on the defensive end. One of the most outstanding players in the class. On Parkston, it was hard to pick an MVP. I went with Braden Jervik because I didn't have enough spots for everybody. But you talked to the coach, Matt Grave, and he said he was the heart and soul of this team. The team gave up just 16 points in their last 11 games. So you know the defense had to be good. Who was the leader of that defense? It was Braden Jervik. He has a football mind. He's a team-first guy, and he played multiple positions throughout the year. You saw him on offense in the championship game, playing at quarterback in the first half of that game. He played running back. He was a receiver. He was an excellent blocker. He runs very hard, has excellent vision, and he's very versatile in all phases of the game. But really, it's his defense where he had the biggest impact. Even though he collected 723 yards and 13 touchdowns on offense, what he did on defense, calling out the plays for a team that gave up just 3 points per game on the year, can really not be understated. Let's add another one to our list. Tyson Stevenson, the senior quarterback, led his team in passing and rushing. Tyson is a player who is a super smart athlete and plays the game at an extremely high level. He competes in every play and he works hard to make his teammates better. He's really a player who knows when to take chances on the field and when to check the ball down, and it showed in his stats. He dominated throughout the year, 1,700 yards passing, 20 touchdowns, and on the ground, he generated 15 more touchdowns on a team that lost just 2 games through the year. Last alphabetically, but definitely not least, Brock Tuttle of Hanson. You just watch a game and you could tell this is the kind of guy who makes a difference between wins and losses for a team. He was rarely brought down by just one person. He was a one-man wrecking crew, not just this year, but over the 4 years that he has been a starter on this team. And he really took teams on by himself and gave his team a chance to win. He's one of the most intense players that Coach Haskamp has ever had. And that's saying something because Coach Jim Haskamp has been there a long time. He was great on offense, great on defense. You see the 81 tackles, 4 sacks, and 2 fumble recoveries for the senior. But just watch a game and you'll know the kind of impact that this guy has on the game. Once again, go to our Instagram page at Midco Sports to give us some suggestions on who would you vote for in this tough decision of the top player in each of the classes of 9-man football. When we come back, we will wrap up 4 more classes of 11-man football in South Dakota with some extremely tough decisions on the other side. Stay right here.
Varsity Sports Live, presented by Farmers Union Insurance. Simply different.
Welcome back to Varsity Sports Live. We're doing our finalists for Player of the Year in all the classes in South Dakota and North Dakota. And we've got 4 more classes to talk about in South Dakota, the 11-man classes. We'll start with 11B. It's the largest class, the most teams of any class in the state. And of course, that makes my decision that much tougher who to include as one of my 5 finalists. But we'll go through them in alphabetical order, starting with Aiden Barfus of Winter. This guy is a 3-time 1,000-yard rusher, a Joe Robbie MVP winner, and an absolute beast. He's been a 3-year starter at middle linebacker in one of the most dominating defenses that we've seen in high school football in all classes. This is a guy who had to share a lot of carries in the backfield with several other runners and still gained 1,154 yards and 18 touchdowns, getting nearly 10 yards per carry. And defensively, he is unmatched. He is one of the best players you'll find playing linebacker in 11B. Congratulations to Aiden Barfus. Let's talk about Cameron Majeski of Hot Springs. We knew he was going to be good this year. I don't know if we knew how good he was going to be. His head coach, Ben Kramer, said he's once-in-a-career football player. He does everything right, leadership-wise, football ability, off-season training, attitude, grades. There's nothing negative to say about him. Well, that's a pretty lofty standard, but he lived up to that standard with a terrific season. 1,741 yards rushing, 28 touchdowns on the ground, and defensively over 100 tackles, an unimaginable 17 tackles for loss with 3 sacks and 2 forced fumbles on the defensive side. It was an absolute pleasure to watch this guy run all year. He ran like a bull when he had a chance, and he carried his team to a height that they've never been to before, and that is a state championship. Congratulations to Cameron. But he couldn't have done it without his teammate, Caleb Rickenbach. He probably doesn't get as much notoriety as his teammate Cameron does, but he himself a 4-year starter and has been the strength of the defensive line for the last 3 years, a real cornerstone on a defense that shut down opponents, especially in the playoffs. Stats sometimes tell the story, sometimes they're just ridiculous. And right now, they are ridiculous. 17 tackles for loss, 15 and a half sacks in 11 games. He just outpowered and outmaneuvered offensive linemen from game 1 all the way until the Dome. Let's also mention Bowden Schiller of Sioux Valley. They got to an undefeated regular season with the quarterback, and Bowden didn't even know he was going to be the quarterback entering summer camp this year. He adapted to the position, and he became one of the best, not only in the class, but in the state. He was very elusive. He was super explosive, and he has twice earned Sioux Valley's Outstanding Lifter of the Year. You can tell he's got the power to play the position. He ran for almost 1,000 yards and 16 touchdowns while leading his team to an undefeated regular season. Those are your finalists in 11B. Let's move on to 11A, where a couple of teams really outshine the competition. West Central and Del Rapids each without a loss before they made it into the Dome in Class A, and they both have representatives in our finalists. Our first finalist alphabetically, Chet Sarda of West Central. Now, he's listed as a running back on the all-state list, but I have him on my list for what he does on the defensive side. 165 tackles. That is ridiculous. He's one of the most sure-handed tacklers I've ever seen at this level, and his coach said he's also one of the most sure tacklers he's ever coached, Barry Mathias. He also ran for 728 yards and 10 touchdowns on the year as well, but was a key cog in West Central's run to the Dome this year. Del Rapids quarterback Jack Henry, a D1 quarterback. You would expect a D1 quarterback to put up monstrous numbers at the 11A level. Well, he wasn't asked to do so, but he completed 80% of his passes when he was asked to throw the ball, and he threw 5 touchdowns in the championship game when he was asked to throw the football. Pretty much the rest of the year, he wasn't asked to do much, but he definitely could do it, and he could do it on both sides of the ball. His head coach said Jack's a gifted athlete and a football player, and they really needed him, especially for his leadership on the defensive and offensive sides of the ball in their championship quest on back-to-back years. Let's talk about Porter Enan of Lenox. He's probably most noteworthy of a basketball player. He's a Division I recruit going to USD next year, but look what he did on the high school football field this year. 70 receptions in 10 games with 1,059 yards receiving and 13 touchdowns. He was a threat anywhere on the field. He has tremendous ball skills, and he could high point a ball and catch in traffic. And that was key because he was double teamed almost all of the time, and he could run any route in the tree and helped Lenox get all the way to a semifinal appearance. Mason Stubbe of Del Rapids. This guy was one of our finalists last year as a junior. Well, he's back on the list as a senior. Ran for 1,563 yards and 29 rushing touchdowns. An absolutely unstoppable force for this Del Rapids offense. He was an impact player on both sides of the ball who absolutely loves football, according to his coach, Jordan Huska. He showed up every day in practice and every day at the weight room and led this team to a back-to-back title. He is definitely one of the best in the class. Let's talk about junior Kane Wallner of Canton. 123 carries on the year for 1,070 yards. He also received for almost 400 yards and was one of the best defensive players. Truly a versatile player. He lined up at tight end this year. He lined up in the Wildcat. He lined up as a blocker. He lined up as a middle linebacker. He lined up in the defensive backfield. He was a punt returner and a kick returner and the punter for Canton. He literally could do it all, and there's a reason he's getting calls as a junior from FBS schools. Truly one of the best athletes, and it's obvious when he steps on the field, he has very few peers. That's a look at 11A. Let's move on to 11AA now. This class obviously has been dominated by Pierre over the last 7 seasons as the champion, but that doesn't mean they have all the good players. A lot of good players around the state, and we'll start with senior Keegan DeYoung of T area, who ran for over 1,000 yards, and he got stronger and stronger as the year went on. When they needed him in cold weather, he was at his best. He has been a strong leader all season in the weight room and in workouts, and really sets the tempo for this T area team, and that's why they're continually a team that makes it to the Dome or to the semifinals each and every year. Even when teams loaded the box on Keegan, he was able to punch in touchdowns, 14 scores for the running back, who also played a tremendous effort on defense all season long. Let's talk about Juven Hudson of Watertown. This guy may have been one of the best players the Arrows have ever had. He was not just keyed on, he faced 8 and 9 men in the box consistently and still continued to put up huge numbers. 1,300 yards rushing, 17 touchdowns. He also had a kick return touchdown, and his head coach gushes about him. He always put in the Arrow football program before himself. Juven will do anything to make our program successful. He worked on drills. He will work with neighborhood kids. He goes to youth football events. He does it all. But on the field, he had few peers and put up excellent numbers once again. Cade Kaiser of Pierre, the quarterback who was reluctant at first to take over the quarterback position for Lincoln Keenholz, played receiver last year, and he really stepped up wanting to be that guy this year at quarterback. Well, he made the transition pretty well. He threw for over 2,000 yards and ran for almost another 1,957 yards on the ground. He really gave the team an opportunity for success no matter where he lined up, and his attitude is really what sets him apart from pretty much anybody else on that team as he led them to another state championship. Let's talk about Lucas Kamshoff of Yankton. This guy, again, probably known better for what he does on the baseball field, but he came in as a football player and absolutely blew the competition away. The team captain had the impossible task of replacing Rugby Riken. Well, he did just fine with one of the most fluid arms in the state, and he could make a pass, any pass on the field to several different receivers. He didn't need just one guy to throw the ball to. He had his pick of several guys he could go to, and that's the mark of a true leader, and Lucas Kamshoff did just that. 2,700 yards, as I said, 22 passing touchdowns, led his team to the Dome for the first time since 2015. A great season for the quarterback, Lucas Kamshoff. One more finalist in 11AA, Jet Zabel of Pierre. This is our second mention of a Pierre player, but we couldn't have a complete list without mentioning this guy. He is a mismatch nightmare and has been a tremendous weapon for Pierre over the last 3 years. Last year was injured and had to work himself into position to play in the Dome. This year he stayed healthy and he put up some monster numbers. 58 receptions, 995 yards, and that is as a tight end in 11AA football. That's unheard of with 18 touchdowns, so over a touchdown per game. He also would line up in the Wildcat. He rushed in 5 touchdowns from that Wildcat formation. Also had a passing touchdown. If you don't remember, one of the most exciting plays in the Dome over the weekend was Jet Zabel lining up at the 1-yard line and breaking a state record for the longest touchdown pass in state championship history, a 99-yard pass to his other finalist, Cade Kaiser. So Jet Zabel can clearly do it all, and when they needed him most at the end of the season, he would step up and play the defensive side of the ball as well. So Jet Zabel definitely belongs on this list in 11AA. Let's move to Class 11 AAA now, where we had our 5th different champion in the last 5 years. A truly balanced field where every season is just a guess, as good a guess as yours as mine, as who's going to win this class. But it was highly represented with some players who have had 2 and 3 years of starting experience in the state's largest class. This guy, our first on the list, Maverick Jones, has been a starter for 3 years, and I think this stat says something more than almost all the rest. The career rushing leader at O'Gorman. O'Gorman has a history of great backs. They've won several championships, and he has the record for the most rushing yards in the history. And he also was playing defense, by the way, which not many 11 AAA players were playing both sides of the ball. But on the defensive side, made 3 interceptions, had 1 pick six. He also was one of the leading receivers in this O'Gorman offense this year with 35 catches for 452 yards. And this guy took a beating. Every time I went to a game to watch O'Gorman play, you would see Maverick Jones getting plastered and peeling himself back up off the turf and then breaking off another great play. His teammate Rylan Satter is heading to NDSU next year, and he still doesn't know what position he'll play at the next level. He was so versatile, a terrific all-around player who ended up setting the record at O'Gorman for most consecutive games with a reception at O'Gorman, but also lined up at fullback, and also was their top pass rusher on defense. Just like so many O'Gorman players, had to play both sides of the ball and really ended up being one of the best players on both sides of the ball. So a guy who could run, catch, block, and he was just an absolute dog for the team this year. You see it by his stats: 69 catches, 766 yards, 13 touchdowns. He also ran in a couple of touchdowns, led the team in sacks and tackles for loss, and also caused a forced fumble, and he had to substitute punt whenever he was needed. He really was one of the keys to getting them back to the Dome this year. A couple of other finalists to mention, of course, Tate Schaefer of Lincoln. This guy improved his game through his 3 years as a starting quarterback in Lincoln's system, ended up rewriting the record book at Lincoln for career yards, career touchdowns, single season yards. Almost any record you can think of now belongs to Tate Schaefer. But he was terrific as a leader. He was humble. He was so sharp with the ball. He was so quick. He ran one of the quickest offenses that I've ever seen in high school. And the maturity that he carried himself with was the key to Lincoln's run this season. Let's mention Navarro Shunke. Offensive linemen, often hard to grade how good they are, but his team ran for 682 yards, and they did so with 3 different primary backs throughout the year. So no matter who got the ball, he was in good hands because they were able to run behind Navarro Shunke. The future K-State Wildcat was put into the defensive line formation from time to time and came up huge. He didn't come up any bigger than in the semifinal game when he needed a 4th down stop and came up with that stop to give his team a chance to take the lead in the closing minutes of that game. This is one of those guys who's funny and has obviously been one of the best wrestlers that we've ever seen in this state. He's also going to go down as one of the best offensive linemen we've ever watched at the high school level. Jack Smith of Lincoln. We talked about how Tate Schaefer rewrote the record book. Well, Jack not only rewrote the school record book, but the state record book at the 11 AAA record. There is hardly a record left after Jack Smith played his 3 years at Lincoln. He put together a fine senior season, seeing double teams almost every game of the year, 72 receptions, 1,171 yards, 21 touchdown catches on the year, and then add to that 3 special teams touchdowns. This year against Brandon Valley set the record for most touchdowns in a game with 6. Yes, 6 touchdowns in a game. And another great thing about Jack, much like Jet Zabel we talked about, when they needed him on defense at the end of the year, they needed an extra player, needed an extra stop. It was Jack Smith that they turned to with the all-world talent to help them win a state title. So there's a ride through all 7 classes of South Dakota high school football. Let's recap those finalists from each class to see who you can go onto Instagram at Midco Sports and give us a vote of confidence who you think should win that class's Player of the Year. Let's start in 9B, where there are 3 finalists. Britt Carlson of DeSmet, Isaiah Meyer of Avon and Lane Cotton of Faulkton area. In 9A, Hunter Kramer of Warner, Gavin Landmark of Dubrook, and Tage Ortman of Canastota. In 9AA, Burke Blasius of Wall, Tayton Hoyer of Howard, and Brayton Jervik of Parkston. And then Tyson Stevenson and Brock Tuttle also made the list for one of the deepest lists and one of the toughest choices that you'll have for picking a player of the year in 9AA. In 11B, Aiden Barfus, Cameron Majeski, his teammate Caleb Rickenbaugh, and Bowden Schiller of Sioux Valley. In 11A, it was Chet Sarda, Jack Henry, Porter Enan, Mason Stubbe, and Kane Wallner, your 5 choices as finalists in 11A. 5 more choices in 11AA. Keegan DeYoung, Juven Hudson of Watertown, Cade Kaiser, Lucas Kamshoff, and Jet Zabel of Pierre. And then 11 AAA, Maverick Jones, Rylan Satter, Tate Schaefer, Navarro Shunke, and Jack Smith are your 5 finalists. Well, all season it has been an absolute blast to bring you highlights and updates all season long on Varsity Sports Live, on Football Insiders, and as well as what we do with Extra Credit and Game Ball throughout the week. We appreciate you watching all season long, and we'll see you next time on Varsity Sports Live.